This is BBC Two. Jo Coburn with Politics Live.
Fixing Britain's potholes, the eco-protester threat to sporting events and inflation still in double figures. This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Tim Loughton, Labour MP Stella Creasy, Daily Mirror political editor John Stevens and former Conservative advisor Salma Shah. On the programme today, remember this pledge from the Prime Minister?
We will halve inflation.
But with inflation at 10.1%, can the Prime Minister meet that pledge? Is the next target for eco-activists the London Marathon on Sunday?
You're welcome. You're welcome. But you have to do it yourself.
Do we need to call for the Terminator to fix Britain's pothole problem?
I came in with my ex like Selena, the flex.
The song written by artificial intelligence, but does the technology risk more than the careers of artists and musicians? And of course, Prime Minister's questions at noon. Let's start with eco-activists and show you a couple of the front pages. The Daily Mail first of all, as climate rebels wreck snooker and vow 30,000 protesters will descend on London. When will someone get a grip on the eco-fanatics? And this is the Sun front page, reflecting the headlines there. A student Edred, son of a mega-rich investor, ruins the snooker. MPs demand tough justice. Great headlines there. They're both reporting that after the protest we saw at the snooker the other day, there is now a warning about disruption to the London Marathon. Environmental groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil are demanding that the government stops granting new fossil fuel licences. What should we do about the eco-protesters, if anything?
Get a lot tougher. First of all, the police have got to not pander to them, as we've seen in the past, where they're starting to glue themselves to the road. You see similar images in France. They don't ask them if they're feeling all right with their lights and water. They pick them up and put them on the side of the road straight away. We need to see much earlier and tougher intervention. And then these are seriously disruptive crimes that they're committing. My constituents are sick and tired of not being able to get their kids to school, get to work on time, get to hospital appointments, ambulances being blocked. Who do they think they are? I want to see a lot more of them in prison for meaningful times, and the message we get out, you don't have a right to disrupt the rest of people's lives in a democracy like ours. If you don't like policy, you have a vote. You have the opportunity to stand in elections like us. Do it, rather than try and play games like this.
Stella?
Well, I mean, I sit here a snooker widow, because this time of year I lose my partner to the beauty of the Green Bays. And one of the things I also think is I'm somebody who wants us to take seriously the climate emergency that we face. I don't see this as winning over the hearts and minds of the people we need to win over. So, I mean, I think, Tim, I worry that you're not talking about the fact that we do face a climate emergency, and those people going to schools will also be facing those challenges.
We are.
But I would appeal to Extinction Rebellion that this is actually losing the argument we need to have. It's losing the ability to hold this government to account for our failure to act on these things. And that particularly, I mean, I think about, you saw at the snooker, Rob Wilkins' family were there. They were just horrified. They'd come to see their son who'd got to the finals. It was a big deal. The snooker audiences were not with them, and actually those are people we need to win over to the urgency of why this government is failing on the crisis and why we need to do more.
Pretty tough talk there from Tim. What do you think should be done about eco-protesters?
Well, I think the Extinction Rebellion are saying their protest, they're planning a 4-day protest over the weekend. They're saying it isn't their intention to disrupt the London Marathon, and I think it would be a massive mistake if they did. You've got all those people who've done all that training, they've raised lots of money for charity. If you start targeting them, you're not going to bring anyone over to your cause. If you've got any sort of campaign, you need to bring people with you. And yeah, doing high-profile things like this, it does get attention, But then you don't want just people to be aware of what you're doing. You want people to come on board with you. And I think that's why we've actually seen Extinction Rebellion has gone away from these sort of tactics. We know that Just Stop Oil were at the snooker, but Extinction Rebellion have actually looked at the polling. They've gone through with different experts and they were convinced that doing these sort of things wasn't converting people to their cause, it was actually putting them off their cause.
Salma?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And there is a consensus, amazingly, around this table that this is kind of the way that Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil should start thinking about how they want to sort of convince people and win hearts and minds.
But do you think there should be the sort of tough response from the police that Tim was talking about?
I actually do, because the disruption that they're causing, it does need to have some consequences. You know, the way that they're thinking about how they are going to make the argument absolutely needs to change. But I don't think that that means that they should be allowed to get away with things that are actually jeopardising and causing real difficulty to people.
What about agreeing with the groups in terms of what they're demanding and meeting some of those demands? I mean, would you agree with both of them, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, that the government shouldn't agree and should scrap all new fossil fuel licences?
Oh, I think it's outrageous that we've started fracking again. I think all these things are a retrograde step. But what I'm very concerned about is that that is an argument we should be able to win. If you look at the science on climate crisis, you look at the failure of this government to act, that is an argument that's entirely winnable. The noise that this is creating takes us away from that argument. So I appeal to these people I'm very sympathetic to the cause that they want to bring up, but these are not the ways to win those arguments. These are not the ways to hold. So Tim did not mention the climate crisis at all in his response.
Well, all right.
That should tell you something.
Okay.
Well, over to you.
What really galls me, I'm a member of the Conservative Environment Network along with 150 other Conservative MPs. So for me, climate change and combating climate change is a really big issue. And this is entirely counterproductive. This, as everyone has said, is switching people off. And they're now trying to hold the government to hostage, effectively, saying if you don't meet our demands by next week, we're going to carry on these sorts of protests.
Right.
They're committing crimes. What mandate have they got for that? Who voted for them? Stand in elections, use your vote.
But is it because even your own Committee on Climate Change, the independent watchdog, has said last month that the government is asleep at the wheel in terms of delivering its own climate targets? Perhaps that's the reason.
OK,
that
Joe, I want the government to go further and quicker, absolutely. But the record under this government over the recent years has been one of the best of any Western nation in terms of moving
up until
to net
this point.
zero,
And I think the Climate Change Committee recognises that.
All those sorts of things. So don't try and say, oh, it's rubbish, they're not taking it seriously.
I'm not. Climate Change
Yeah,
Committee
you've just reopened. I mean, sorry. Actually, this government is going backwards on some of the things that we need to do.
Not.
So they have an absolute point in that you are failing to take seriously the urgency of acting now, and actually the government is taking us back on things. The question for me is there a better way to win that argument? And I would just simply appeal to them that, you know, the snooker community are people who absolutely would want to come with you, but you've lost them now as a result of what happened, and that is terribly sad to me.
Counterproductive. It doesn't help the cause that we all
But you and I need to be held to account. We did stand for election, Tim, so we need to be held for account the fact that your government is reopening a whole series of fossil fuel debates that, you know, when they're not divesting, they're not investing.
One specific coal mine for the steel industry, which we can have a debate
One is too many,
on.
isn't it?
Why are these protesters not outside the Chinese embassy? Why are they not protesting against China, which emits 29% of the world's pollution? That's where they can really potentially have an impact.
Tim? And the problem with, your reaction was simply to focus.
There's no or. It's entirely disrupting innocent, law-abiding citizens trying to go about their lives.
If you think the government should be doing more on climate change,
we all do.
So what are you doing to make that happen? Because absolutely, we can hold these people to account. This is not the way to win that argument. But there are things that you could have voted for that you didn't, and that we could be doing more in Parliament on, aren't there? And that's the challenge here,
absolutely,
isn't it?
there are things you could have voted on for getting better climate change measures and didn't.
Like?
Well, it's no good.
Like?
OK, it's no good.
You can't name something.
Hang on, let him finish.
Well, I wasn't assuming we were going to have a whole debate about climate change. But you can't just say we need to have even higher windfall taxes on oil companies when the oil companies are some of the biggest investors in renewable fuels. So pressing by saying we're not doing enough to tax the fossil fuel companies means there is less money for investment in renewables that you and I want to see more of.
No, I'm sorry,
and it also means less employment in the North Sea. There has to be a balance to reach net zero.
No, that's
Reaching
not the
net zero is not about everything being carbon neutral. It's about balancing those things that will always be carbon positive with things that are carbon negative as well.
I hear your argument, but your argument doesn't. No, actually, I'm sorry. Your argument doesn't make any sense because renewables are where some of the biggest profits are to be made. So actually, for the oil companies who you have let off, who've made billions of pounds over the cost of living crisis,
and where
could have gone into tackling the energy bills that people.
Who are the biggest investors in renewable projects in solar and hydrogen?
They're investing in renewable energy.
They are the major fossil fuel companies.
I listened to you. Please do me the courtesy of letting me finish my sentences. They are investing in renewable energy because renewable energy is a very efficient, very effective way to make a lot of money. That is a good thing, but we shouldn't let them off the hook for the amount of money they've made out of the cost of living crisis and investing in the oil that they've used. What we should be doing is saying you need to do both. It's not either or. In the same way, absolutely, we should hold China to account. We need to hold ourselves to account. You've opened a coal mine, you've encouraged fracking. These are things that are going to take us backwards in our ability to meet those targets. The question is, why aren't we having that debate? And you started this conversation by just attacking Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil and not acknowledging, as you say belatedly, that we need to tackle climate change. Surely, if you want to win the argument on climate change, have the argument on climate change and close that debate down, that they're saying no one's doing anything.
Absolutely. The question is about what do we do about these protesters? Whatever their cause is, it's the wrong way to go about it. I'm particularly aggrieved because they are counterproductive to the cause that you and I share of wanting to combat climate change. We can have an argument about the extent of what we're doing on it. If you're now saying that fossil fuel companies are only going to renewables because you make money out of it, great, then more people will go into renewables and the transition to net zero will come quicker.
You can't make an argument against a windfall tax because you want them to have more money.
Listen, this has been a good, thorough debate, but we're going to talk about... We're going to talk about potholes. You can carry it on, of course, the Jimmy, but after the programme. Let's have a look at the front page of the Times with this rather stirring picture. Their residents' relief as Britain's deepest pothole is finally filled. The pothole in East London turned into a 5-foot deep sinkhole. Don't know how he got out of that. Sparking fears of a serious accident. Yes, it's a local resident there, Dean Hope, who got into that sinkhole, hoping it would put pressure on Newham Borough Council to fix it. We're going to talk to Mark Morell, also known as Mr. Pothole, who calls himself the world's best-known pothole campaigner. He's been campaigning all over the country to fix potholes since 2013. Hello to you. How bad is the problem? Oh, just one moment, Mr. Pothole, because we cannot hear you. I'm just going to hold you there for a moment to see if we can get some sound. Let's try once more. How bad is the problem?
There's a massive problem. Their roads have been neglected for decades and there's a £14 billion backlog in road maintenance. Repairing potholes is a waste of money. Unless actually government of any party that gets in the future actually resurfaces our roads on an annual basis like other countries, we're going to go further down decline. We're 37th in the world for the standard our roads for a G7 nation.
And how dangerous do you think it is?
Well, it's reported that one cyclist a week is killed or seriously injured as a result of potholes.
Killed?
And over 70 motorcyclists are killed or seriously injured as a result of badly maintained roads because the skid resistance on roads have worn off. There's a report showing that that needs addressing on at least a fifth of their country's roads.
Right, well, politicians, both of you, all parties not taking it seriously, and it is a big issue for people. Tim?
It's a huge issue, and daily I get photographs of potholes in my constituency, and it's a real problem in rural areas and in urban areas. So the government put a £200 million fund in the budget. We need more. In my county in West Sussex, we've got £3 million of that. But what we also need to do is to clamp down, as from the beginning of this month there are new rules and regulations about utility companies digging up the roads, because it's often because they don't restore the roads properly that they then crumble much more easily. They are now going to be fined much more heavily for that, and they're going to be inspected on the standard of their work. But when councils go and repair the potholes, too often they're not done properly as well. So 6 months later, it's crumbled. So we've got to have more investment, but we've got to have better quality patching up of these potholes, and we've got to do it quicker. In my county, we have an app. You can put your GPR location on the app where this pothole is. It will go directly to report it, and they are usually dealt with within 14 days. So we need to use technology more like that. But some of them, there are parts of the country where they're just taking ages. There was a local stunt in Worthing the other day where one councillor presented a first birthday cake to a pothole which had been there for a year and hadn't been dealt with. It is a problem.
I'm going to come to you again in a minute, Mr Morell, but first of all, how would Labour fix the problem?
Well, part of this is about the way in which money has just been shredded out of local government to have the money to be able to repair potholes in the first place. And I look at the budgets of local government as a former local councillor and weep for my colleagues about the difficult choices they have to make. But I do also notice that it is Labour councils that are spending a lot more money fixing potholes and getting them fixed more quickly than Conservative councils. So it is also about the priorities. And actually, one of the things I think about is, well, it is true.
We'll come on to that. We'll come on to that in a moment.
We can trade statistics. I think it reflects what people really want us to be talking about in Parliament, which is the everyday challenges they're facing. Because actually, in a cost of living crisis, you go over a pothole and it does something to your car, you probably can't afford to fix it.
Right. Mr Morell, does that reassure you? Is that going to fix the problem, what you've heard?
No, same old rhetoric. Both parties arguing each other. In the year 2000, the carriageway maintenance backlog was £3.75 billion, when arguably there was more money available. A then Transport Minister wanted to actually put a 10-year plan to reduce that. That never happened. And now we're at over £14 billion. And as for local councils, I am their biggest critic, but many of them, and it doesn't matter what political persuasion are, have got immense pressures on them. Unless government fund an annual resurfacing programme, we can expect our roads to get worse and worse and worse. And we're on a managed decline, and it's actually costing the UK economy billions of pounds. Road users pay in tens of billions of pounds each year in all sorts of taxation associated with roads, from fuel duty, VAT, road fund licence, VAT on repairs. But very, very little gets spent on maintaining our roads. And government will say we're spending £5 billion over a 5-year period in our roads. Well, over the last 3 years since they've done that, the backlog's got worse by £4 billion. What you're doing isn't working. And there's a Transport Select Committee report called Filling the Gap that's got all the answers. I worked with Lynn Greenwood when she was chair.
OK.
But government gave it lip service.
All right, well, let's go to our other guest just to talk about the claims and counterclaims. I mean, Mark Morell has got all the detail there, and we'll come back to you in just a moment. The Daily Mail has this claim. Labour's woke spending, it says, could have sorted out 30,000 potholes. Council chiefs spent £1.5 million on equality, diversity and inclusion training over last year, according to new figures. But then in the Mirror, it says exclusive Labour councils spend £4.24, which is what Stella was saying, more per person fixing potholes than Tory town halls. And we also have the Liberal Democrats, who have said that some councils in England are taking over a month on average to fix potholes once they have been reported, although that's better than the year that Tim was talking about, with some individual potholes left for 567 days before being repaired. They want all cuts to roads funding to be fully reversed. This is something of a political bun fight, isn't it?
It is, and that figure, that 567 days one of my colleagues was writing that story on Sunday, and I've got potholes around the corner from me that it's not even really a pothole, it's just like
a crater.
It's like beyond that, it's just this big, the road's basically like falling away. So I'm one of those sad people with one of the apps, like Tim says, from a local council. I mean, usually when I'm walking the dog, it's reporting mattresses that have been abandoned, left overnight. I'm straight on it on the app reporting them. And I thought, well, I better get on with reporting the massive pothole around the corner from me. So maybe in 567 days it might get fixed.
You haven't had a response then?
No, well, it said it's approved. It says been reported to Highways, but it's still there at the moment. Well, it's in the southeast of London. But
who runs it?
No.
But what I was going to say was, the parties are clearly like trading blows on this. They can all come up with different statistics, the different ways to kind of suit their and then come up with pothole fund and all of this. Clearly, there's a problem there that our roads haven't had enough investment in them. We know that local authorities don't have the funding they need to be able to provide all the services they do. And then, surprise, surprise, things like potholes don't get sorted. And we know why we're having this round now. It's 2 weeks before local elections. And once that's gone, this issue will go out of the headlines and we'll just move on.
Well, Mark Morell's nodding away there. I'll come back to you in a minute. Is that you agree with that,
Yeah,
Salma?
no, completely. And I think it's the sort of cynicism of the fact that it's local election time, so we're all going to sort of start talking about potholes. But what I think is really interesting about what Mark said from a policy perspective and a national policy perspective is that this is a productivity question. This is a growth question. And if the government reframed it in a way that talked about roads as infrastructure in the same way that it does rail, then perhaps we wouldn't have these issues and there'd be a different pot of funding that could be available to it. But I do think that a lot of these stories in trading blows on these statistics is cynicism rather than actually wanting to deal with the issue.
I mean, Mark Morell, would you be prepared to pay more taxes in order to fund either local authorities or to government, central government, to fix the problem?
Well, that's a debate of a lot of motorists think they pay enough already, and there's billions of pounds put into things like HS2 that I think is the biggest white elephant going. Where our road network is vital. 95% of all of our travel is on our local roads, and we've got to stop this thing of repairing potholes because, quite right, you repair a pothole, you get a failure with it weeks next to it. It's not because the pothole's failed, it's the area around it that's in poor condition. So unless you resurface your roads, places like Japan do a 25-year investment plan on their road network. Unless we accept that across parties and actually put in another £3 billion a year, every year, to get rid of the maintenance backlog, because it's not only carriageways, there's a £6 billion backlog in bridge maintenance. If you include footpaths, drainage and everything else, we're probably sitting with, in my estimate, about £30 billion backlog. And something's got to be done because with the cost of living crisis, those costs have just gone up by 20, 25%. And the poor authorities trying to do something about it haven't got the funds to do it. And the national highways that are not political have got the same issues.
Would you commit to that?
Well, I've got a degree of sympathy with what Mark says, certainly on HS2, but also on hypothecating the tax. And it's quite right. The amount that drivers pay through all the taxes, petrol, fuel and your tax disc and everything is way more than actually gets spent on the roads. And it's also not a pothole problem. I did a big video on the litter problem on our Verges Long roads as well. The problem is, on prioritising, most roads are the responsibility of local authorities, apart from trunk roads, who are also spending money on education and schools and on social care for adults and children. So highways, roads, are always going to get bumped down the list of priorities. And that is the problem. We've got to take it more seriously. There has to be more money on a long-term plan to actually upgrade our roads, because we're not getting value for money, and it is dangerous.
Right. I mean, should there be priorities? Should things be cut? Other things be cut? And road repairs and pothole repairs be placed higher up?
I think this is why when, Rishi Sunak stood there doing the classic politician pointing at a pothole and saying, say goodbye to the potholes, he wasn't being serious because he wasn't showing he had a plan. I'd love to see Mr Morell being our national pothole czar, because actually some of this is about...
there you go.
Some of this is about joining up how you're working together, isn't it? Some of it is about a contract not just to fix the pothole, but to make sure all the roads and the connective roads are working together. You can't blame local government. Local government has no money. This government has shredded local government budgets, and Tim and I would agree they're also trying to cover things like social services and social care with that. So you need to invest in it. It is seen as economic infrastructure, actually potholes and tackling potholes, but we're not saying how they all fit together.
All right.
Somebody like Mark maybe could knock a few heads in government together.
Mark, would you accept the job if it was in Stella's gift to give it to you, or offer it to you, I should say? Would you accept the job of pothole czar?
I don't know if I would, because having worked with the Transport Select Committee inquiry, I'm not going to waste my time talking. I want to get things done. There is an easy way of doing it.
Why be the czar?
Thank you very much, Mark Morell there, Mr Pothole. Just briefly before we move on, do you promise to talk about this after the local elections, or will it quietly be forgotten?
I have been talking about potholes, and constituents have been sending me photographs of potholes and photographs of machines that they have in America, these great big things that come along and gobble up potholes and resurface them for months and months and months. This is not going away after local elections.
I don't have local elections and I'm still talking about it.
That's true. That's a good point, but you're still talking about it. Fair enough. Let's show you this in the Daily Telegraph headline. Spy chief warns cabinet of AI disinformation risks. So Jeremy Fleming, the director of GCHQ, sets out dangers and benefits of language services such as ChatGPT. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, told the cabinet on Tuesday he wanted the UK to be at the forefront of the artificial intelligence revolution. And the Technology Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, has been reported to want relatively light touch regulation to encourage AI innovators to invest in the UK. But is that the right approach, or should we be more cautious? Let's talk to Professor Anil Seth. He is the Professor of Cognitive and Computational Neuroscience at the University of Sussex. Professor Seth, what dangers do you see in the way artificial intelligence is developing?
There are both short-term dangers and long-term dangers. The short-term dangers are relatively easy to predict. They are, as was just said, dangers like misinformation and disinformation coming from these new language models like ChatGPT that we're all getting familiar with, and deep fakes, the ability to generate videos that look entirely realistic. These can be both used inadvertently. They can create all kinds of nonsense that just impact our ability to tell what's going on. But of course, they could also be used actively through disinformation campaigns to disrupt democracy in the end.
Yes.
There are also long-term dangers too, which people talk about when they worry that AI might become as intelligent or more intelligent than humans and escape our ability to control and direct it. Now, this is a bit further away, but I think we need to be worried about both and not conflate the two kinds of worry.
All right. I mean, let's just have a look, actually, at this photograph. In fact, it was AI generated, but it won a competition. The winner actually didn't accept it because he said it wasn't truly a photograph. We're showing you the picture there. And we also heard in the headlines an AI-generated song. So these are the sorts of things you're talking about, the sort of deep fakes, if you like, that are extremely convincing. Do you think the government is taking the potential dangers of AI seriously enough?
Unfortunately not. I think the approach of taking a very light touch regulatory stance is worrying. The EU, by contrast, is being much more active about regulating these new kinds of technologies. The US, even China, are doing a bit more here. And the issue is that these technologies are developing so quickly, they're taking everybody by surprise. They're even taking the leaders in the field by surprise. People who are developing these language models are themselves calling for extra regulation because we just don't know what purposes they could be used for, or inadvertently what might happen. And we're used to regulation in other areas of society. So if someone's releasing a new medicine, if someone's designing a new aeroplane, we're very comfortable with the idea that rate of progress needs to be balanced against proper risk assessment. And just because the risk with AI is maybe less visible than flying in a tin can at high speed through the air, it doesn't mean the risk is not real. And regulation is, I think, essential in order to make sure these new technologies are safe.
Professor Seth will stay with us. Salma, what do you think? There needs to be more regulation.
I think we haven't gotten to a point where we can discuss regulation credibly yet on AI, because what is the regulation you are going to bring forward when we don't really know the potential of the technology? I think what the Prime Minister is trying to say is that we need to be able to create an environment where we can explore this technology, which is interesting, and see what it can do. And at some point, what is the regulation you're trying to put in there? Is it the regulation on the use? Is it the regulation of the technology? And, we hear that other countries, like China, are bringing in regulation. Well, what kind of regulation is that? Is it because it's restriction on use, restriction on research? What is actually happening there? There is actually an issue as well, because AI and the development of AI technology is a global thing.
Yes.
And there is not moral equivalence between the way that we might think about regulation and the way, say, a country like China might think about the regulation. So there actually has to be a bit of a diplomatic effort here as well, in terms of what we're going to do when this technology develops that essentially sits in private hands at the moment, like with the Googles and the Apples of the world.
I mean, the Google boss says it's keeping him awake at night. He understands to some extent the tech here, but he finds it scary.
Yeah, and it's not just him. There's Steve Wozniak, who was the co-founder of Apple. These aren't technophobes who are saying this, people calling for a pause on this. And at the moment, we seem to be racing and racing and racing forward and forward and forward. You look at ChatGPT, even compared to 6 months ago, a year ago, these technologies have come on leaps and bounds. And we seem to be in a space race with different companies putting forward all these different models. And therefore, I do think we do need some caution, else we're just going to get to a point where, you know, you've got AI being able to self-improve. You've got the example there of, you know, the Google Bard being able to teach itself Bengali, and even Google doesn't really know how it managed to do that. I think we do need to have some sort of sensible conversation about where the limits are.
I mean, is the government being not being cautious enough, I should say, too complacent?
I don't know. And look, my training was in archaeology, and the Mesopotamians weren't big on AI, way before the quill. But I need to know more, because this is the future, this is happening. It's been predicted that by 2030 it will be responsible for 5% of the economy in the UK, and it is an international thing. And I think just as we've had much more regulation and attention on medical ethics, around genetic engineering and things like that, where we need to have a serious grown-up debate, and we have been having on various advances that we can issue regulations for, but we politicians need to understand this more. I think the same applies here, because AI is going to be, and is already, hugely powerful. It will have implications for crime, for impersonation, for disinformation, and it's not just the UK that needs to do more, it's the whole of the world that needs to sit down and work out how we are going to benefit proportionately and legally and safely across the world to this, and that is going to be a huge, huge challenge.
I think that's why I'm worried about the approach that this government is taking, because I think one of the things is to learn the lessons of social media. We didn't have much regulation of social media. The world has spent a lot of time trying to catch up with the impact that it's had as a result. We look at the online harms bill, etc. By not working with Europe. I take your point about China, but actually I look at America and the FTC's approach. I look at Europe and the approach they're taking. And the contrast in the way in which the UK is acting has two potential implications. A, we are setting up the UK to be some kind of single estate on this, where you talk about it being a regulatory sandbox, the idea that people are going to come and innovate here, but it also means we're going to be testing things on the UK first. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that when we're not looking at what those tests might be. Secondly, actually, from a business perspective, that means that you're setting up two different regulatory regimes. So if you're one of those companies, are you going to work just in the UK, or are you going to work with the European and the American markets, which are much bigger, have much more potential for you? It doesn't make any sense to go it alone. It makes much more sense to collaborate with our European colleagues, with America about this, in the ways that we didn't do on social media, and now we're catching up as a result. When you talk about the sorts of things we might regulate, it is exactly how it is used, the claims that are going to be made. You know, nobody is more pleased than I that we could replace Ed Sheeran, but actually it's much more serious about what we could be doing and what could happen as a result in our economy, what it could happen to people's trust in society. Going it alone is no way to protect our public.
I don't think we are going it alone, and the idea
we're doing something different, aren't we?
Well, doing something different doesn't mean you're going it alone. And actually, across those markets, especially in the EU and the US, there's been sort of splits in the way that we regulate around all technology. And in fact, the UK was the pioneer around online safety and online harms. I helped write the white paper in 2017 before any other market did it on online safety. I think the issue,
Europe, didn't we?
No, we did that. We did it independently, and we were ahead of Europe and ahead of the EU at that time. I think the issue here is that it's not just about regulatory sandboxing. It is allowing an understanding through research facilities, not just through private business, about what the potential of AI is, and releasing that. So Cambridge, for example, understanding what it can do that benefits society, but also understanding the limitations. And don't forget, on regulation, state regulation on these things gives state power. So that is why I make the comparison with China, because even on social media and regulation of social media, the difficulty is about giving state power and authority and control. And that is a very big ethical question.
Oh, well, let me put that back to Professor Seth. Yes, what's your response to what you just heard there?
There's quite a lot going on. I think there's this idea of we don't understand enough yet in order to develop effective regulations. I don't agree with that. I think a great deal is known already about the potential risks and about the potential responses that we could bring. So regulation in terms of, for instance, requiring these new systems to be transparent. So we know what they're doing when they make decisions, for instance, decisions about medical treatment or decisions about who to hire or who to fire. We know why they do what they do. There should also be oversight in their use. And this also means being sure that we know how systems are going to work out there in the wild before we release them out there in the wild. This gets to the point that was just raised about whether we want the UK to be, a kind of sandbox for testing these systems on real people. And the lesson from social media, I think, is very, very important. I'm glad that was raised. We've seen how disruptive that can be just through its ability to amplify content. But with these new AI systems, we now have the ability to generate content too. And when you put these two things together, we're in really dangerous territory. The threshold that we've crossed, and I think this is really critical to say, it's been said for a long time that AI is going to come and it's going to be really powerful, really disruptive, but we have crossed the threshold recently, especially with these large language models. We now have systems which can converse with us as if they're other people. And our psychology, our makeup is not well tuned. It's not calibrated to deal with these kinds of systems. We can't help but attribute them with things like thinking, believing, and we take them seriously, regardless of what's going on under the hood. It doesn't, in a sense, matter whether they're actually intelligent or not.
All right.
We can't help treating them in the way that we might treat other people. And that is something that we really need to be careful of before releasing these systems out there into the wild.
Professor
The last point, just on competitiveness.
Yeah, go on.
Many companies want regulation because it levels the playing field. At the moment, the competitive advantage goes to companies that are less cautious and more willing just to try whatever and put it out there. So regulation can, in fact, I think, help us have a sustainable AI future in the UK.
Professor Seth, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll return to this subject again in the very near future. I just want to bring you some news that has come to me. This is following on from the Commissioner for Standards, who was investigating or looking at the Prime Minister's declarations of interest. We've just been told the newly published list of ministerial interests contains a reference to the childcare agency, Koru Kids, that Rishi Sunak's wife holds shares in, following a row over the Prime Minister's declarations. Why has that suddenly appeared, do we think? Because, of course, it was the absence or omission, it seems, that triggered this investigation. What do you make of that, Tim?
Well, I don't know why it suddenly appeared. They are produced from time to time. It was only a few months ago that Rishi Sunak became the Prime Minister. He has to declare all his interests, as I did when I was a minister in the distant past. That's a very rigorous exercise. You have to declare everything that's declarable to the Permanent Secretary in your department, and that's a matter of public record. It's not in the Prime Minister's control as to when all those declarations then get published. The important thing is he declared everything he needed to declare. He abided by the rules. There's nothing to see here.
Well, and actually, it is true, reading on, there is other news about this, and that is that actually the latest list of ministerial interests has been published, but it hadn't been updated for almost a year. So do you accept that it might have been the first opportunity, Stella, for the Prime Minister to actually update it, and he's done so?
No, because Kat McKinnell asked him in the liaison committee directly about this issue, about the fact that we have this really quirky policy on giving people more money to sign up to an agency to be a childminder than helping people be a childminder, because we need more childminders, tackle the childcare crisis. And he was asked directly about whether he had any interest to declare, and he said no, he didn't. And obviously his wife is a shareholder. I think what is more extraordinary about this is that Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister since, November? You know, we've had...
6 months
yeah,
he's been
we've had,
PM.
and we've also had quite a lot of scrutiny of his wife's business interests. I think most people would think it was extraordinary to have so many business interests that you forget some of the ones that you need to declare, because that's clearly what's happened here. But it is pertinent to why on earth is this government choosing to give agencies extra funding, because an agency such as the one that she has shares in will benefit directly from that, and perhaps not looking to waive the fees for joining to be a childminder in the first place. That is a reasonable policy question. He didn't answer it in the liaison committee. He's answered it now, but people will ask whether that did influence the policy.
Well, Tim, do you accept that?
The opposition is always going on about the fact that the Prime Minister's wife has a deal of personal wealth. She has investments, no doubt. I don't know what they are. Now we do. In hundreds of different things. I doubt the Prime Minister even knew that she happened to have an investment in a childcare company. He declared everything. It's in the public record. It's now been published.
That really is how the other half live,
Hold on. To suggest, as clearly has been made here, that a policy was made by government specifically to benefit a company in which the Prime Minister's wife had a direct investment, which I doubt he was actually aware of. Come on.
So your defence is they are so wealthy, they don't know what they're making their money from, so it couldn't have influenced the policy. It's a reasonable question to ask, why such a quirky approach to investing in childminding? And the Prime Minister should have been aware of the potential for people to see a conflict of interest. That is what this update now tells us about.
And that's one of many subjects. And if the Prime Minister had to refer to what was in his register in front of every question he answered, because his wife happened to have a shareholding in something that was affecting education, in health or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. He's declared everything he needed to declare. That has been published. He abided by the rules. Trying to make some big conspiracy out of it is pretty desperate. And remember, this Prime Minister was the first to publish his tax returns. He's been more financially transparent than any other Prime Minister.
We're probably going to discuss this after Prime Minister's questions. I want to draw your attention to this, which is very important, and that is the UK inflation rate. BBC News story, food prices rise at fastest rate for 45 years. Tim, it's crucifying people. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have said repeatedly it's their pledge to bring down, halve the level of inflation. Yes, we did have the Office for Budget Responsibility saying it will be down to 3%, 2.9% by the end of the year, but it is still in double-digit figures.
And which is concerning.
Why?
And I know absolutely the impact it's having on cost of living of my constituents. We all do as MPs. And we need inflation to come down as far and as fast as possible.
So why are they still rising so fast?
So this month, it would appear that there's still very high inflation on food. Things like milk have gone up 38%, ready meals up 21%, whilst energy and other major bills have come down. I hope that over the next few months we will see much bigger falls, but I don't see in 1 month's figures any reason to be concerned that we're not going to reach that target by the end of the year.
Except it ticked up and then it's sort of come down to what it was a couple of months ago. We're still not below those double-digit figures. Let me just show you this graph just as a comparison. Inflation in advanced economies. You can see there's the UK at the top compared to Italy, Germany, France and the US down at just over 5%. What would Labour do to bring down inflation?
Oh, there's all sorts of things that you could do to tackle the inflationary pressures in this economy. And one of the things to remember about this is it still means that prices are going up. You know, which, I mean, that's what keeps me awake at night, is all the people with debt. What you have to do is tackle the causes of inflation within our economy. You have to get growth going. You know, most people don't have shares in companies to rely on to keep them going to pay their bills. So you also got to tackle the personal debt. It's one of the reasons why I want to see this government doing much more about the companies who are profiting off people.
Would Labour be able to... Would Labour be able to tackle it in any significant way? The Office for National Statistics says that it's dependence on gas for food production here and bad weather. What would Labour do about those?
Well, first of all, Tim spoke against a windfall tax and being able to get the money to invest in tackling the bills.
I voted for a windfall tax, not as high as you wanted.
All right, well, let's not go back to the windfall tax. I just want to hear
I'm glad for a Damascene conversion. Maybe we can...
Well, hang on, Stella, so what would Labour do to bring down that headline rate of inflation?
There's a number of things that you can do to tackle the inflationary pressures in the economy. You do need that investment. We also need to tackle the fact that people can't afford to spend, they can't afford to feed themselves. There's just too much month at the end of their money. As I said, most people don't have shares in fancy companies to cover their costs. I think there are things that you can do about growth as well, about rebalancing our economy. I also, I'm chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. I want to see us have a much stronger trading relationship with Europe to get the money into our economy to help those businesses, a third of whom have given up exporting. So we have to solve the issues in the economy. But are you asking me whether Labour would crash the economy in the way that Kwasi Kwarteng is trusted?
No, I don't think I did.
Absolutely not. No. It's all trying to sort out the mess. The mess that Tim, that you're laughing about it like you laugh about.
Well, you mentioned
people
Europe.
People are terrified with Europe. So it's a good example for me. One of the things I'd love to see us doing is looking at the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention, which tackles the rules of origin, which makes it easier to export, deals with the paperwork that businesses have. Businesses are crippled because our economy is stifled.
Right, I'm going to come to
arguments that we're making within the Labour movement.
We've got Prime Minister's questions coming up in the next few minutes, and my colleague Oscar Bentley will be watching and listening out for any statistics that need some further scrutiny. We'll talk to him afterwards from the BBC's Political Research Unit. I mean, interestingly, Tim, you will probably remember Brexiteers like Jacob Rees-Mogg promising that leaving the EU would result in cheaper food.
Well, you have to ask Jacob why he said that, and ultimately we will see what happened when we're starting to trade with other parts of the world more, and the biggest trade agreement that we've just got with CTIP as well. We will see that. We actually
0.08% in our economy that will add. That will not help us with the cost.
Hang on, yeah, let Tim finish his point.
Interesting. I think what explains the figures at the moment is in this country, historically, we've always had very cheap food. So actually, we have really good big supermarkets who negotiate really good margins. So you could say that's to the harm of farmers and others. So when you've got really low food prices already, and then you have the weather conditions as well as fuel prices and everything rising, we are more susceptible to that, which I think explains the differences.
Clearly, but to the disappointment of consumers, households and voters here.
Yeah, and you looked at in the figures as well, you look at the things that are going up. So obviously there's food, also housing costs have gone up 25%. And we know why that is. I mean, part of it is because of that budget that you're referring to with Liz Truss. That's the thing. Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. And obviously, because we're not building enough houses as a country, those are obviously longer-term things, but they do need to be things that are sorted.
Do you think Rishi Sunak is going to get and achieve his pledge of halving inflation by the end of the year?
You can, yes, he could get there. The problem is it's semantics, because halving inflation means that you're just going to slow the rate of growth.
Absolutely.
So the only way you're actually going to tackle this is wage increases.
Right. Well, you've mentioned wages. As you say, prices will still be rising. They'll just be rising more slowly. But if we look at the Times quickly before PMQ starts, stalling wages leave British workers 3% poorer than a year ago. We're going into the chamber.
Later today, I will return to Belfast to mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It's an opportunity to thank some of the leading architects of peace for their courage and the pivotal role they play to set the groundwork for a better future for the people of Northern Ireland. We will also commemorate those who are no longer with us. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're in the middle of a housing crisis with mortgages soaring, rents rising and house building set to a post-low. And just last week, with an interview with the Conservative Home, the Prime Minister admitted his disastrous decision to drop housing targets to appease Tory party members. Can the Prime Minister please explain to the House why the views of 1,000 members are more important to aspiring homeowners, families across the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in empowering local communities to make the decisions that are right for them and to protect their green spaces. And the place where most acutely where house building is not keeping up with need is in Labour-controlled London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been reported that the Welsh Labour government is going to incentivise people smugglers by offering £1,600 of taxpayers' money every month to asylum seekers. Can I ask my right honourable friend for an assurance that he will never contemplate such a daft idea in our small boats bill?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know my noble friend Lord Bellamy and the Secretary of State for Wales wrote to the Welsh Government yesterday confirming that we would not be undertaking their request. Now, I know that the Labour leader has said that the Welsh Labour Government is his blueprint. And unbelievably, as my honourable friend said, Labour in Wales are trying to pay illegal migrants £1,600. Mr. Speaker, we're stopping the boats. Labour's paying for them.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Tory party chair says that public services are in pretty good shape. Has the Prime Minister met a single member of the public who agrees with him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, because of the record investment that we're putting into public services like the NHS, we're now getting waiting lists down. Because of the reforms that we've made to our education system, more children are studying in good and outstanding schools. Because that's what you get with a Conservative government: more funding, more reform, and better outcomes for Britain.
He's living in another world to the rest of us. People waiting more than 2 days from an ambulance because they broke the NHS. Only 1 in 100 rapists going to court because they broke the criminal justice system. A record number of small boats crossing the Channel because they broke the asylum system. People can't afford their bills, can't get the police to investigate crimes, can't get a doctor's appointment. Does that really sound like pretty good shape to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's the record? Since 2010, since 2010, crime down by 50% under the Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. 20,000 more police officers, we've given them more powers, and we've toughened up sentencing, all opposed by Sir Softy over there.
Mr. Speaker, either the Prime...
Order. Our constituents want to hear the question and the answers. What I would say is, you'll progress questions beyond. The Prime Minister wants to leave early, along with the Leader of the Opposition. Help me to help them.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, either the Prime Minister doesn't use the same public services to the rest of us, or he simply can't see the damage they've done to our country. In 2019, Ariel Lee, a convicted people smuggler, threw boiling water over a prison officer, leaving him with first-degree burns. The prison officer said it felt like acid. His face was on fire. His attacker was found guilty, received a prison sentence, quite right in my view. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Well, Mr. Speaker, while record is clear on sentencing, it was this party and this government that passed the Sentencing Act last year. It toughened up sentences, and the average custodial sentence has now increased since 2010 by almost 2/3. For child sex abusers, it's up by 15 months, and for rapists, it's up by 2 years. And when our Sentencing Act ended the automatic early release of offenders who pose a danger to the public, it was the Labour Party who voted against it.
Well, the problem is, Prime Minister, Ariel Lee's sentence ended up being suspended. And anyone watching this would wonder why someone who violently attacks a key worker isn't behind bars. Well, the court judgment spelt it out. It's because it took 16 months for the attacker to be charged. That's ridiculous. And it took another 2 years before he was sentenced. Completely unacceptable. Can't the Prime Minister see that because they've lost control of the court service, because they've created the largest court backlog on record, he's letting violent criminals go free?
Mr. Speaker, here's the record. We're cracking down on grooming gangs, and he's uncomfortable, Mr. Speaker, he's uncomfortable addressing. We toughened the law on sex offenders so they spend longer in prison. He voted against it, Mr. Speaker. And we've increased rape convictions by over 60%. Meanwhile, he attended 21 sentencing council meetings that watered down punishments. That's why they call him Sir Softy. Soft on crime, soft on criminals.
Mr. Speaker, I've prosecuted thousands upon thousands of sex offenders. He's just shown he doesn't understand how the criminal justice system works. No wonder he can't fix it. And he thinks that cracking down on crime is suspending a sentence where someone should be in prison. That shows the problem. And another reason, Mr. Speaker, another reason cited by the court for suspending the sentence in Ariel Lee's case was a letter from the Justice Secretary in February about prison overcrowding. As a result of that letter, courts have been told to have awareness of the impact of current prison population levels when passing sentences. In simple terms, the wrecking ball the Tories have taken to criminal justice means that thousands of people who should be in prison aren't. The court also said, he shakes his head, he should read the judgment. The court also said that it's for the government to say when prison conditions return to a more normal state. Now, I know the Justice Secretary has been busy trying to save his own job rather than actually doing it. But has the Prime Minister asked him when he's going to get a grip on the prison system and withdraw that letter which is allowing criminals to walk free?
Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of building 20,000 more prison places. That's what this government is delivering, because we're toughening up sentencing and putting more people behind bars and making sure that our most serious offenders spend longer there. But I love it when he talks about his record as a lefty lawyer, Mr. Speaker, because I was looking at this, because when he was there, he's quoting things, I read that people were really disappointed that his organisation let down victims. That wasn't even my assessment. That was his shadow Attorney General.
I want to get through these questions, so do my constituents. If there's any member whose constituents they aren't interested in, please leave the chamber. Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I was in office as Director of Public Prosecutions, those benches my greatest supporters. In 2013, the Home Affairs Select Committee said, we would like to commend the work of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer. He's striven to improve the treatment of sexual assault. They go on to say...
Can we? Prime Minister's questions matter to our constituents. I wonder if I were you. It's not the day. I want to get through it because I'm trying to help the Prime Minister and the Leader. You're not being helpful. We'll hear this question no matter how long it takes. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is 2030.
Order. Ms Stevenson, I've heard a few weeks. This is the last week. I suggest you quiet, or it's better you leave. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Home Affairs Select Committee in 2013. They go on to say the work I did should provide a model to other agencies, and when he leaves the CPS, he will be missed. Now, that report was presented to Parliament by the then Home Secretary, future Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead. And the government, those benches, noted and supported it. Now, it's obviously always a good look to have your work recognised, although they did lay it on a bit thick. So perhaps the Prime Minister will spend less time trying to rewrite history and more time sorting out the mess he's made of criminal justice. Because the crisis in criminal justice is just a snapshot of public services collapsing under his watch. People can see it wherever they look. Our roads, our trains, the NHS, the asylum system, policing, mental health provision. The Tories have broken them all they've got left is excuses and blame. Now, I know the Prime Minister would rather talk about a maths lesson than the state of the country, but perhaps he could solve this equation. Why, after 13 years of a Tory government, are patients waiting longer than ever, criminals walking free, growth non-existent, and why, everywhere you look, does nothing seem to work at all?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can't quite remember, but I think he started by talking about when he was DPP in 2013. And I'm actually glad he brought that up, because there was something else that happened when he was DPP in 2013. And that was when he got his own special law, Mr. Speaker. I've got it right here. It's the pensions increase. It's the pensions increase for Keir Starmer.
Order. Just a moment. Can I just say, order. I expect both sides to listen to the questions and the answers. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, here it is. It's the pensions increase pension scheme for Keir Starmer, QC, 2013. Now, while we're introducing a transformative policy to support doctors to cut the waiting list faster, he wants to raise taxes on public sector workers. And it's one law for him and tax rises for everyone else.
Don't let me double down on you. Please, Sally Ann Hart.
Mr. Speaker, recently I presented a Prime Minister's Point of Light Award to Joan Willett, nearly 107, for her fundraising for the British Heart Foundation. And two other Hastings and Rye residents, Anthony Kimber and Alistair Felly, were celebrated as community champions at number 10. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all our fantastic volunteers and community champions, not only in Hastings and Rye, but throughout the United Kingdom, and will he continue to bring them together in celebration?
Can I thank my honourable friend, and I'm absolutely delighted that Joan received her Points of Light Award, and volunteers and community champions like Joan and Anthony and Alistair all make important contributions to their local community, and we're all very grateful to them. In fact, every month, Mr. Speaker, millions do the same thing, and they deserve our praise. Their generosity is integral to what makes our country and our community special, and it's right that we do everything we can to celebrate them.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn. As I said, I really do want to try and help the Prime Minister. If you don't, I do. Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to hear that they had an equally peaceful and relaxing Easter break as I did. Prime Minister, was it their refusal to stand alongside striking workers on the picket line, their acceptance of the economic damage being caused by Brexit, or perhaps their support for denying the people of Scotland the right to choose their own future, which led to the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party urging voters to back Labour?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing is not getting distracted by the things that are going on elsewhere, and we're focused on delivering for the people of Scotland. We're making sure that we fund public services well with £1.5 billion extra in Barnett consequentials. We're making sure that we provide support with the cost of living. Now, I know, Mr. Speaker, at the moment, him and his party are focused on other matters. We're just going to motor on with the job.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. We will take no lectures from a party which has not had a mandate to govern in Scotland since 1955. He went through 3 Prime Ministers in the course of just a matter of months, who crashed the economy, who sent mortgage rates soaring, who've taken energy support away from families most in need. Now, a Prime Minister has been fined by the police not once, but twice, who take donations from Russian-backed donors and who, of course, have stuffed the House of Lords with people like Baroness Mone. But, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. What we're talking about is the fact that the leader of the Scottish Conservatives believes that the people of Scotland should return Labour Party members of Parliament to this House rather than Scottish National Party members to this House. So isn't the message to the people of Scotland quite clear? Don't give the Tories what they want.
Mr. Speaker, actually, the Scottish Conservatives deserve enormous praise for forcing the SNP into abandoning their completely unworkable, fundamentally flawed deposit return scheme, Mr. Speaker. So it's good that the SNP U-turned and listened to the voices of the Scottish Conservatives and to business, and we look forward to working with them on delivering something that actually works to deliver for the people of Scotland. And that's just it, Mr. Speaker, because if they can't fix the mess that Nicola Sturgeon left their party in, how can they possibly fix the mess that she left Scotland in?
Mr. Speaker, it seems clear that the junior doctors' strike is causing serious risk of loss of life and certainly causing harm and pain to thousands of our constituents. The first line of Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm. When does the Prime Minister think the BMA abandoned this central tenet of their profession?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. We value the work of junior doctors and are keen to find a fair and reasonable settlement which recognises their role and the wider economic context facing the UK. He's right to highlight the impact on patient safety, and that's why this government has brought forward minimum safety legislation to ensure that patients can rely on a core level of emergency service to protect vital patient care. That's something that we on this side of the House support, but I know is not something that's supported by the party opposite.
Ed Davey.
Speaker, tooth decay is the #1 reason that children over 4 end up in hospital. Regular dental checkups could prevent that, but too many parents can't get one for their child. In the East Riding of Yorkshire, there are now almost 3,000 people per NHS dentist. In places like Herefordshire and Norfolk, fewer than 2 in 5 children were seen by a dentist in the past year. This is a scandal, Mr. Speaker. So will the Prime Minister take up the Liberal Democrat plan to end this crisis and make sure people can get an NHS dentist when they need one?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NHS recently reformed dentistry contracts, which will improve access for patients. Dentistry receives about £3 billion a year. There are around 500 more dentists delivering care in the NHS last year than the year before. He mentioned children. I'm pleased to say that almost 45% more children saw an NHS dentist in that year compared to the year before.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister's question time on the 4th of February 2015, David Cameron said he was determined to do whatever it took to fix the Dawlish railway line, the only route to the southwest. Phase 4 risks losing part of its agreed funding, while Phase 5 falls foul of a 10-year moratorium on new funding. The line is only as resilient as its weakest link. Will the Prime Minister commit to getting this resilience programme back on track and fully funded?
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to improving the resilience of this iconic stretch of railway. It provides a vital link for people in the southwest. That's why today we've invested over £165 million in delivering solutions to protect the line, and I know Network Rail is continuing to develop the case for further investment, and my honourable friend will be keen to feed into that.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week my city of Dundee not only announced its flights will be connecting with Heathrow, but also the Scottish Government's commitment to Dundee being at the forefront of making Scotland a major world economy, both bringing investment, jobs and opportunity. However, the UK Government seems to have a problem with this. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's international engagement is to be reduced. Despite being paid for through Scotland's wealth and taxes, UK ambassadors and diplomats have been instructed to obstruct the Scottish Government's international engagement, with every foreign nation worldwide told not to deal with the Scottish Government directly. This, Mr. Speaker, has already been described as, and I quote, smacking of a parent trying and failing to control a teenager. So will the Prime Minister assure me and the businesses, wealth creators and most importantly my constituents that want to see Dundee and Scotland prosper, that while Scotland's short time left in this unequal union remains, Scotland will neither be put back in a box or will be bending knee?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually pleased to say that we are supporting the communities of Dundee. They received £14 million in the Levelling Up Fund to support Green Transport Hub in the city centre. It's a demonstration of the UK Government wanting to invest in communities in Scotland and deliver for Scottish people.
Sir Keith Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, I joined my 17-year-old constituent, Alfie Ford, in walking to raise funds for the National Autistic Society. Alfie's mission is to walk 15,000 steps every day in the month of April to raise awareness around autism and to show that every autistic person deserves the best chance in life. This Saturday, he's walking from Birmingham City Football Club to Edgbaston Stadium and then back to Birmingham City Football Club. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing Alfie the very best for his walk and his noble mission to change the way people think about autism for good?
Can I start by praising Alfie for his fantastic efforts? He's an inspiration not just to his community, but to many others, and I wish him the best of luck for Saturday. Our autism strategy sets out our ambition to ensure that autistic people across all parts of the country get the support they need to live fulfilling and happy lives, and I look forward to seeing Alfie's progress on the rest of his journey.
Do you see MacDonald?
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Lisa and her civil service colleagues have worked tirelessly and with distinction during some of the most challenging times. But she's fed up with ministers patting them on the back, all the while imposing derisory 2% and now 4.5% pay rises, despite years of pay restraint and now double-digit inflation. She asks simply, why should I keep working for a UK government that treats its workers with such contempt? So, will the Prime Minister stop with the myths and excuses and start negotiating a fair deal with the unions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to all our hard-working public sector workers for the job they do. We have a well-established independent pay review body process for making sure that we can have pay settlements that are fair and affordable, and I'm very pleased that we reached agreement with many unions on those pay settlements, and I hope that those members vote in support of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that those who seek to criticise the Conservative record on law and order should look in the mirror and ask the question, who was Director of Public Prosecutions for some of those years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Our record is clear. We've halved crime since 2010. Neighbourhood crime has fallen 25% just in the last few years. Criminals are spending longer in prison, and crucially, we, unlike the party opposite, are giving them the powers they need to tackle violent protests.
Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, my elderly constituent Anne has been in Turkey for 5 weeks now after her husband suffered a devastating brain bleed and is now in intensive care after their holiday insurance, Stay Sure, refused to pay medical bills and have so far refused to engage with me. This has resulted in Anne being stuck with extortionate medical bills and surgery costs which she has covered using their life savings. With finances running out, they're both stranded and been advised that they'll need to find at least £50,000 to pay for an air ambulance to bring them home. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to consider all the possible options to support constituents like Anne and her husband in difficult situations like this, especially where insurance companies abdicate all responsibility?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? I'm very sorry to hear about the case that he raises. My thoughts, as I'm sure everyone's, will be with Anne and her husband at this difficult time. I will ensure that he gets a meeting as soon as possible with the relevant minister to discuss and progress this case further.
Rick Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I tell a tale of two councils? My constituents who live in Conservative-controlled Wychavon District Council have enjoyed 6 years of council tax freezes and excellent public services, while my constituents who live in the Malvern Hills District Council area, which is run by a ragtag bag of so-called independents and Greens, pay nearly 50% more in council tax for a bandy property. Does the Prime Minister agree that the best thing that my constituents can do for the cost of living is to vote Conservative on the floor?
My honourable friend is of course right. Right across the country, those in Conservative councils pay lower council tax than those of the party opposite. And the choice at this election is clear. It's the Conservatives that deliver for you. It's Labour that costs you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Women's Rights Network published a report by criminologist Professor Joe Phoenix called When We Are at Our Most Vulnerable, revealing that between January 2019 and October 2022, which includes the pandemic lockdown, of course, there were a staggering 6,539 reported rapes and sexual assaults in UK hospital settings. That's an average of 33 incidents every single week. And as 8 police forces did not provide any data, the real figures are bound to be significantly higher. What can the Prime Minister and his government do to ensure that all women, staff and patients are safe in Britain's hospitals?
Yeah, can I first of all say I was deeply shocked, like the right honourable lady, and appalled to hear about the cases of sexual assault and abuse in the NHS, and I pay tribute to her for her long-standing campaign on these issues. NHS organisations are responsible for protecting their staff and patients from sexual harassment and conduct. They've recently established a domestic abuse and sexual violence programme to build more robust safeguarding processes for protecting patients. We will work very closely with them to ensure that that is implemented, and I know she will hold us to account for doing that.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 2nd of June, Corwin Station on the Llangollen Steam Railway will be officially reopened, having been closed 60 years ago under the Beeching Acts. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the volunteers, the local community and the funders who have made this possible, and also take his own share of the credit for granting the Levelling Up Fund to Clwyd South when he was Chancellor, which has paid for the magnificent new roof on Corwin Station?
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend for all his campaigning on this. I'm delighted that Levelling Up Fund has delivered for Corwin Station. It's a huge boost to local ambitions to see trains returning there, and I know that a small team of the project's volunteers have actually built the majority of the station. They deserve credit, and indeed a local company in Wrexham has supplied the new steelwork for the canopy roof, providing a welcome boost to the local economy, and I look forward to seeing the station open this summer.
Daniel Zeichner.
Mr. Speaker, over recess I was invited to visit one of the major supermarkets in my constituency to discuss food waste. But what struck me most was the experience of shop workers on the front line. They told me they expect to suffer a violent assault every single day they go to work. So while more maths might always be helpful, what is this out-of-touch Prime Minister doing to make sure that people can be safe in their workplace?
Well, Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves to be safe in their workplace, and that's why we're making sure that through our Sentencing Act we have appropriate sentencing in place for that, and more generally making sure that there are police officers and community support officers across the country to help combat crime. We'll happily look at future sentencing when we look at reviews of that case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leadership and teamwork delivered Bolton Wanderers' superb 4-0 victory in the Papa John's Trophy at Wembley. It's delivering the Bolton College of Medical Sciences and delivered Ayub Patel's superb Rungworth by-election victory. So what message does my right honourable friend have for Councillor Patel and all the campaigners, candidates and activists as we run into this festival of democracy, our local elections?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I share in my honourable friend's congratulations for all those in Bolton, but also my commiserations to those in Plymouth, especially actually our party chairman, who's an avid supporter of the Green Army. But most importantly, I welcome the election of Councillor Patel, and I look forward to him joining our other councillors in delivering for their local areas with less crime, lower council tax, and importantly, filling more potholes.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Home Office announced that they would not be setting up a bespoke visa scheme for the fishing industry of the sort that is already available for people working in fish farms and in offshore wind farms. They also told skippers that crew previously employed by them under a temporary scheme had to stop working immediately. As a consequence of that announcement, in fishing ports around the coast today, many fishing boats are tied up, unable to go to sea. It's the only time the Home Secretary has been successful in our stated ambition of stopping the boats. The Prime Minister and his party promised our fishermen a sea of opportunity if they would support them. But what's the point of a sea of opportunity if you can't get crew to fish in it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I recognise the characterisation that the honourable gentleman put forward. We are proud champions of the UK's fishing industry, not least with our £100 million investment in fishing communities, but when we're always looking to engage with them to make sure that they get the support they need. Crucially, all the opportunities that are there for them because of Brexit, we're keen to make sure that we deliver.
Jane Hunt.
Join me in thanking Lorna and Shirley of the Marios Tenente Centre and local churches in Loughborough for all their hard work in establishing a community allotment. Local people use the facility as a great place to get outdoors, as well as a relaxing place to be.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Lorna and Shirley for all their fantastic work? Allotments can do wonders, not just for, as she said, providing food, but also well-being and a place of sanctuary for people around the country, and they deserve enormous praise for creating one for the benefit of their community.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Well, you just heard Speaker of the House saying there. That does complete this week's Prime Minister's questions. Let's welcome our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the government, we have Andrew Bowie, Energy Minister, and for Labour, the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Welcome to both of you, and the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. Vicky, Keir Starmer decided, as he has done, actually, in recent weeks, to a greater or lesser extent, concentrate his fire on the Conservatives and the government's record on crime. It was quite personal at times from both of them in terms of Rishi Sunak's responses too. What did you make of it?
Well, I think you say the personal side of this was actually what was pretty striking. Now, I know we're in the middle of local elections and people, of course, already talking about the possibility of a general election next year. And you can see those personal attacks really going up a notch, aren't they? And what's interesting, what Sir Keir Starmer's doing here is he's wrapping up the crime and the problems he says that there are with the criminal justice system with all sorts of other things which he says aren't working. So a general theme of the NHS isn't working, the railways aren't working, the asylum system's not working, the prisons are overcrowded. But he is very much trying to pin this on Rishi Sunak. Now, it reminds us a little bit, doesn't it, of Tony Blair, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Clearly something Labour think that they can get onto the front foot on, because traditionally people would have said, well, you know, the Conservatives are the party of law and order. He obviously doesn't think that there and is really going for it on all of that. But it was interesting as well, Rishi Sunak coming back with a very personal attack too. And I don't think I've heard him say this before about, you know, Sir Softy. And, you know, talking about him being a lefty lawyer. He was ready for this, wasn't he? That was interesting. The Prime Minister was ready for this attack and saying that actually Sir Keir Starmer was the person who watered down sentencing when he was Director of Public Prosecutions.
Well, let's stick with this issue because Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, reached quite early on, actually, in response to Keir Starmer's questions and said that actually crime overall had fallen by 50% since 2010, when the Conservatives have been in office. Let's talk to Oscar Bentley, the Political Research Unit for the BBC. Oscar, is that true?
Yeah, so in Prime Minister's questions just there, Rishi Sunak did say that crime had fallen by 50% under the Conservatives. I've had a look at that figure, and he is right. If you take estimated crime from the Crime Survey for England and Wales, compiled by the Office for National Statistics, that's only estimates, however, not actual recorded cases of crime. In 2010, it was 9.5 million estimated cases, but last September, it was 4.7 million estimated cases. However, if you include fraud and computer misuse crime, it's 9.1 million. Now, to be fair, that type of crime only started being estimated in 2017, so we can't really compare that figure from the figure now back with the figure in 2010. If you take crime actually recorded by police forces, however, that's gone up. So a couple of questions to your guest, to your Conservative guest. Is that a misleading figure for the Prime Minister to have used when it doesn't include all crime? And for your Labour guest, estimated crime has fallen. Is Keir Starmer being fair when he says the criminal justice system has become broken under the Conservative Party?
Thank you very much, Oscar Bentley there. Well, just answer that, first of all. I mean, we are trading statistics here. It depends which ones you go for. Estimated crime is not the same as recorded crime, and it doesn't include perhaps the fastest growing set of crime, and that is fraud.
Yes, but we can only go with the statistics that we're presented with, and we cannot compare crime statistics in 2010 with 2022 for crimes like fraud and computer-related crime, because they, as has just been said, only started being recorded in 2017. But in terms of the vast majority of crimes that were being committed in 2010, the Office for National Statistics shows quite clearly
estimated
that crime has halved. And I think that is goes to the success of what we are doing. We've toughened up sentencing. We are getting more criminals behind bars. The criminal justice system is not broken. There are less crimes being committed in the United Kingdom today.
It's not broken.
I think I feel this, I think the public will feel this watching this. They'll think, which country is Rishi Sunak talking about? Because it doesn't sound like the one he's Prime Minister of. I mean, I cannot tell you of all, there's no public service today in this country working better than when the Conservatives came to power, I would say. But particularly on this issue, law and order, criminal justice, I cannot tell you how angry I get at what the big changes since 2010 have meant in terms of, for Greater Manchester where I live, huge reductions in police officers, the fact that many crimes aren't even expected to be reported to the police anymore.
Like burglary.
Drug dealing, burglary. The police will say, look, what can we do? We've not the resources for this. And I understand there has been a change in some types of crime, computer misuse and fraud. That is a growing area of it. But the idea that crime is halved under the Conservatives, that this country is more safe, that the criminal justice system is working better, honestly, Andrew, I think people listening will say, where are you talking about? It's like when the Prime Minister says poverty's gone down or the economy's working well or the NHS is working well. There is nothing better today after 13 years of Conservative government than when you came to power.
Well,
I just honestly don't know
that's not true.
how you can present that.
Well, that's not true. And what I don't understand is if you believe all of this, and why, given every opportunity that the Labour Party has had to back the government in increasing sentencing guidelines, in putting more criminals behind bars, in getting tougher on criminals in this country, did you vote against?
Because
the
government's that is dishonest.
propositions?
Let's be clear. The sentencing bill you put forward had stronger penalties for defacing a statue than for rape. I'm not going to put my name to that and support that. That is a disgrace. And the way, again, the Prime Minister's presentation of this, the public see through it. They can see through you. They know they're not better off. They know the country's not safer.
We've increased
they
average
know
sentences
public
for rape
services
convictions by
aren't
60%.
better. And the idea there are more police officers today than when you came to power, and that you didn't reduce police numbers so drastically under austerity, and you didn't change it said that the functions, the support for those officers in terms of the back office functions. People know what the truth is, and it's not the picture presented by your spin doctors and your Prime Minister.
People do know what the truth is, and people remember the state of the country's finances in 2010, which is why tough decisions had to be made. But we are increasing the number of police officers. We are getting tougher on criminals. And by the way, according to the Office of National Statistics, crime has halved in that period.
So people have never had it so good.
That's
you honestly think after 13 years...
That's not what I said. That's why we're toughening up some of the sentencing guidelines. That's where we're getting tougher
because
on criminals.
Because of failures before.
I do not understand why every opportunity the Labour Party has had to support us on this, they didn't vote for it.
You're not serious
so we're not tough enough.
You're not serious enough.
That wasn't and look, I don't recall that being
It is a fact, though. It is a fact, though, to say, isn't it, that Dominic Raab has given a clear instruction that sentencing has to be considered alongside overflowing prisons, and that you basically have to have lesser punishment of criminals because of the state of things. That is a factual statement.
No, but it's absolutely correct that when sentencing, consideration is given to the spaces that are available in prisons. That's why we're creating more prison spaces. We're putting more criminals behind bars. That's why there's more people in prisons. We're creating more prison spaces to put these criminals in. It would be great if the Labour Party actually could find it within themselves.
The appalling case that Keir highlighted today, where there wasn't a custodial sentence, how has that happened if everything has never been as good as you believe it to be? How do we get these consistent problems where people aren't being punished for serious crimes, so people don't feel safer? What's going wrong, Andrew, genuinely? Because you keep telling us the country's in a brilliant state. Greg Hands says the economy's working well, NHS is working well, you're saying criminal justice is working well. What's going wrong with the reality we see before us?
There are obviously issues within the criminal justice system, which is why we have taken the tough action that we have to improve the system. And again, I don't understand why, at every opportunity, the Labour Party doesn't back us.
All right, I'm going to interject. Well, I'm going to interject because it's a very interesting debate between the two of you. Vicky, does some of this flow because it's clear that Labour and Sir Keir Starmer are going to make this a centrepiece going into the local elections and a centrepiece going into the general election, this issue of crime and more broadly a broken system across all public services. Does it also flow from this ad? Call it an attack ad, if you like. We can show everybody, you'll have seen it. Do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. Is this working?
I mean, it did feel today as if this was the extension of that, really. And, this has proved pretty controversial, that ad, because it is incredibly personal. It is suggesting pretty directly that Rishi Sunak doesn't think that paedophiles should go to prison. I mean, it's quite a claim, isn't it? Now, there's been a lot of talk about in Westminster about whether this is working. And interestingly, I spoke to a campaigner from a different political party, actually, who said that they thought, actually, it might be working in the sense that it changes the debate. So when this came out, all the talk was about migrant votes and, were the Conservatives doing something to actually, improve that situation and do something about it? It did change the talk about it. And you've got to remember here, parties don't put this out without road testing it. You know, they do put this in front of focus groups, they put it in front of people to see what the reaction is. I get the impression that what Labour are trying to do here is to say, look, you will think Rishi Sunak's Mr Nice Guy, maybe he's not. And, you know, the Tories will be probably a little bit concerned about it. And, you know, let's see if they go for personal stuff as well, which I think we saw Rishi Sunak do today a little bit, didn't he? Talking about Keir Starmer being a lefty lawyer and all the rest of it.
Do you believe the words in that advert? We may be able to show our viewers again. Do you really sincerely believe that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, doesn't think that adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison?
That ad, which I support, is about proving the Conservative Party and this Prime Minister are accountable for their record. And the outcomes we see.
Yeah, but do you think Rishi Sunak doesn't believe that people convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison?
Look, I don't think Rishi Sunak has any idea what life's like in this country. I genuinely don't. And I think it is fair to hold him to the outcomes in public services, whether that's the NHS, the criminal justice system, or the economy, or anything else. And I know, because we keep seeing these frequent changes of Conservative Prime Ministers. I think the last time we were on together, there was a different one, and you had to, unfortunately, Andrew, deal with all that, which I have sympathy for. But every time the new Prime Minister comes in, they say, oh, well, the Conservative Party, nothing to do with us, all completely new, judge us from day one.
Oh, no.
That's not reasonable. It's about their record, and that is their record.
Will you repeat those words yourself? Because you haven't done up until now. You've sort of paraphrased the bottom, which is under the Tories, whoever is in charge, 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children under 16 served no prison time. But what about the top bit? Can you say Rishi Sunak doesn't think those people should go to prison?
I think Rishi Sunak has presided over a system where those people haven't gone to prison, and we're holding him to account for it, and that is fair, and that is the role of the opposition.
Right, so you don't really believe it, do you? And some of your colleagues...
he is responsible for the state of this country.
No, that's slightly different, because it's very, very personal, and it may be true. You may very much believe that he doesn't think those people should go to prison, but I don't think you do.
No, I think he is responsible for the state of this country. The Conservative Party should be held accountable for their record. That is what that ad does. That is where the attention has gone with that advert. And that is fair. And actually, I like the idea, actually, to come on this and hear that people will defend the Conservative record, because usually what we hear is the economy has nothing to do with them, the NHS has nothing to do with them, criminal justice has nothing to do with them. They are accountable, and their record is not a good one.
Right. I mean, viewers will note you haven't repeated those precise words, and they'll probably think you don't believe them.
Well, I think the public can see for themselves the state this country is in. I think they don't agree with the presentation given by the Prime Minister or the people in the Conservative Party. And I think highlighting those failures is legitimate. Just think, after 13 years of Labour government, the achievements we could put forward, that classic,
crash the economy,
satisfaction.
No money left.
Right. It was in a better state than it is today. And there is no doubt. And by the way, responding to the global financial crisis, as you've had to respond to a global pandemic, is a reasonable thing for governments to do. There is not a single public service you can tell me today is in a better condition than when you came to power. And the economy is in a terrible state.
And the truth is, Andrew, we are talking about it. It is working, because they are being highlighted. The fact that you've got the biggest court backlog in however many years, that sentences for serious criminals are being suspended, like the case that Keir Starmer raised. It's all being talked about. So those ads work.
Those ads, frankly, and I think everybody can see it, smacks of a desperation on the part.
You wouldn't do that. The Tories would never do anything like that.
The reason that these ads are being published, the reason they're attacking Rishi Sunak personally, is because Rishi Sunak is more popular in the country than Keir Starmer.
He's more popular than the Conservative Party. He's got a slightly better rating than the party itself.
He's a lot more popular than yourselves right now.
But even there, the gap is slowly but surely closing. And if I was if I was the Labour Party right now, I'd be slightly concerned that people in the United Kingdom prefer the idea of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister to Keir Starmer, and are beginning to change their minds on whether or not they would like to see a Labour government. The gap between the two parties are closing. This smacks of desperation, because the Labour Party are very worried. Their key messages are not cutting through, and Rishi is more popular than Keir.
I think what the other thing here is that the Labour Party is looking at how Rishi Sunak has played all this since he came in. And he is trying to obviously put a big divide between himself and Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. So I think what's happening here is them saying, well, hang on, you have been in government for a long time. You were part of all of that. You can't just say, look, this is a whole new start, this is a fresh start. You have to take some responsibility for what's gone on for the last few years.
Well, one issue which is of huge concern to everybody, but particularly people struggling with cost of living, which is most people, because inflation today, yet again, is still in double-digit figures. Prices rising, food prices particularly rising at the fastest rate for 45 years, and we are the highest level of inflation compared to other advanced economies. Let's listen to one caller to Radio 5 this morning.
We've discussed selling the house, but where do we live?
Yeah. Well, listen.
We got a letter through last month saying our mortgage rates had gone up again. And then we heard, I live to listen to the news in the hope that the mortgage rate is going to go down or something's going to give.
I mean, there's a woman who's very upset. I know it wasn't completely clear what she was saying, but she was saying they might have to sell the house, that the mortgage rate has gone up. That will be probably as a direct consequence of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget. And inflation is stuck in double digits, despite the Prime Minister saying and pledging to halve it. I mean, what would you say to that caller?
Obviously, your heart goes out to the caller, and all of us, all MPs, have constituents who are struggling with the cost of living situation. I should just say, it wasn't just... look, mistakes were made. The Prime Minister has admitted that. The previous Conservative administration did make mistakes. But there were global factors as well. There's inflation around the world. Yes, of course, we acknowledge that in this country, inflation is far higher than we'd like it to be. That's why it's number one on the priority list.
But food inflation is still going up. It's going up from just over 18% to just over 19%.
Absolutely. That is unacceptable. That's why we're taking the action that we are to bring down inflation. That the energy price support that we brought in at the beginning, as we went into the winter, that was taken.
But it's not working, is it?
Well, inflation is coming down. We're still on track to get inflation halved by the end of this year. The IMF says that the Prime Minister's plan is sound. Interestingly enough, by the way, cutting inflation doesn't even feature in the top 5 priorities of Keir Starmer. It is number 1 for the Prime Minister because inflation...
Because you're the government.
The impact of it... Well, he's setting out his plans for what he would do if he was Prime Minister. He has 5 priorities. Cutting inflation isn't one of them. It is the number 1 priority of the Prime Minister because inflation and rampant inflation that we have had in the past few months has the effect. We've just heard that poor woman explaining on the radio this morning.
Right. I mean, the Office for National Statistics does, in part, agree with Andrew Bowie, saying there are global pressures. Global pressures that are keeping inflation high, particularly high energy costs on food production, and they mention bad weather. So what would Labour be able to do about those?
Well, this is where, again, my frustration boils over, because there are global factors, particularly the energy price spike and the food inflation price spike caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And you're right to say the global pressures have put that up. What I think people find laughable, Andrew, is when those supply chains adjust, when some of that pressure will recede, all of a sudden, having seen inflation gone up, that was nothing to do with the government. When those pressures change and it comes down, you want the credit for that. That is ludicrous. And obviously, in the short term, it isn't working. I do think, by the way, the next time we get statistics, because of how energy prices contribute to the overall inflation rate, there will be some movement. And again, they'll claim credit for that. There'll be nothing to do with them. Food inflation is the real pain. Now, where I think, because of these global pressures and what they have meant, where the government is particularly culpable and how we would have been different, is the exposure of the country to these pressures. And we know from that chart there, from the statistics...
Well, let's show it, since you're referring to it, because you can see it here in front of us.
You pick any economic indicator, inflation is just one of them. You know the UK is in the worst position of any major advanced economy. There are things the government could have done in its 13 years in power, particularly around the way they cut off insulated homes, massively reduced the trajectory of those measures, where, in other words, people have been more exposed to these global pressures. That is really where they are culpable. I would like to see some honesty, some admission of that, rather than pretending these global factors, as they change and recede, you are responsible for that. But that is where... That chart is a chart of public policy decisions in the UK compared to Italy, Germany, France, US, in the time they've taken. And that is where I think you have to take responsibility.
Andrew?
So it's our responsibility that it's got 10.1%, but when we do, as you just admitted, the next time these public stats are published, you expect to see inflation receding. You don't think that we should take any of the responsibility for achieving that?
I think our exposure to the price spike is your fault, and I think those supply chains have changed, particularly energy prices, wholesale energy prices, and if it comes down, that will not be your achievement.
Because of the actions of this government to support every single person in this country to survive £1,500 with their energy bills, we have actually been able to manage the situation far better than we would have been. Yes, of course, inflation is far higher than we would like to see it. That is precisely why we're taking the action that we are. That is precisely why it's number 1 on the Prime Minister's priority list. And this government is absolutely pulling out all the stops to ensure that inflation begins to recede and the pressure on people, like we heard, the support with energy bills for one of them, getting the economy on a firm footing, ensuring that interest rates can come down to a more manageable level so that mortgage rates can fall. That is all all. Those are the actions that this Prime Minister and this government are taking to support the people out there with the cost of living. Every single Member of Parliament has cases like that awful case that we just heard on the radio like there. It's precisely why we're taking the action that we are.
I mean, Vicky, this could be the issue. I mean, it's certainly the overriding issue for most people, and that is the cost of living. We've talked about crime in some depth, obviously a key issue too, but this will be felt very keenly.
Yeah, it will, and obviously part of the problem there is if inflation is still high in this country, that suggests that interest rates might still have further to go up. The Bank of England will make that decision
that's the lever
again, so that's the other problem. But it will come down to, at the next election, it'll be how people feel. Now, you know, people, I think, will feel worse off. Everyone, no matter how wealthy you are, you feel worse off than you were before, and it will come down to who or what is to blame for that. Do people think it is the government's fault and that budget, that mini budget, was the main driver for it? Or will they think, actually, you know, the other global issues are more of an issue? And crucially, who's the best government to fix it? And that will be, I still think, you know, even this far out from a general election, what the debate will be come that.
And the reason, part of the reason, the equation, if you like, that people are feeling it so keenly, we may be able to show you the headline. We used it earlier in the programme from The Times, but it says stalling wages leave British workers 3% poorer than a year ago. Do you accept that because wages have not clearly kept pace in any way, there it is, with inflation and now fallen way behind and comparable to similar jobs on the continent, that they're feeling it even more here?
Yeah, we'd like to be in a position where wages were able to go up. We have to be very careful when it comes to public sector pay demands, by the way. I mean, Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, for example, pointed to the BMA's 35% demand for junior doctors as something that would actually put inflationary pressure on to the economy and actually have an adverse impact. So there's a very fine balancing act here when it comes to pay.
You'll remember that Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, promised a high-wage economy.
Absolutely.
Well, what's happened to it?
Well, that's what we're striving to achieve. We want to get to a place where we've got a high-skilled, high-wage economy. Every single action this government is taking is driving us forward. But can we not? We should not forget. There are global factors at play here. We are recovering from a global pandemic.
Of course.
The economy took a huge battering as a result of that. By the way, the only reason that so many people were able to keep their jobs during that pandemic was because of the foresight of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, in the furlough scheme, keeping millions of people employed in the first place. We are balancing all of those things right now. Inflation is coming down. We want to see it go down faster. That is why it's the number one priority of the government.
Right. I mean, let's just move on to the NHS briefly, because that is another area that Keir Starmer at the beginning asked about in terms of the government. And Keir Starmer was saying that you are going to bring back targets for the NHS, a little bit like under Tony Blair. As far as I know, those targets are still there. They may not have been met, but there are targets there. Which targets are you bringing back that don't exist?
I think you're right to say some of the targets have been kept, but they're not hit. I mean, the A&E waiting time, extraordinary how badly the government has genuinely done on that. I remember David Cameron scrapping the cancer targets, though. I clearly think there's been a detriment of care in that sector. But most of all, look at the state of the health service in '97. I mean, it was on its knees, as it is similar to now. Look at it at the end of that period. It was the best performing, the most popularly supported health system with huge levels of satisfaction from the British public. We've turned it around in the past, and I think we can turn it around in future. It will not be easy, but having clear expectations, top-down leadership as to how to deliver that, working with the workforce to do so, I think that's the way forward.
Well, obviously, national insurance contribution went up in part to pay for the improvements that you have talked about. You're not advocating higher taxes at the moment, although...
Scrap the non-dom rule, put £3 billion of revenue...
Well, £3 billion is, as you know, is not going to fix the
I think we can say £3 billion is not a small amount.
No, it's not insignificant. One of the other things that Keir Starmer talked about, actually, are single-sex wards. It was brought up by Rosie Duffield at PMQs, the Labour MP. He said, for me, patient security, safety and peace of mind comes first. That's why we support single-sex wards, confirming that he meant single-sex on the basis of biology. And I think most hospitals want greater clarity from the government in terms of that guidance. So does that mean that trans people will have to stay in wards of their biological sex rather than their assigned gender?
Well, we support and always have the current law under the Equality Act, which is where you can have a single-sex space in pursuit of a legitimate aim, and that's the proportionate means of doing so. I think that would apply in some cases here. I'm not completely on top of the detail. There might be, I think, individual provision, personal provision for people within that, and I think there'd be different cases depending on the different circumstances.
But if you're a trans woman, which ward will you be on?
I think that would depend on your circumstances, or you might have individual...
But he said it is going to be on the basis of biological sex. So it implies that actually if you're a trans woman, you will be on a men's ward.
I'm not familiar with the detail of the case law in this area, but I think the law as it stands, protecting single-sex spaces where that's the right decision and the proportionate means of doing so, is our position, and I think that's the right one.
All right, well, we'll have to get more clarity on that. Before we go, just as we came into Prime Minister's questions, Vicky, we heard that Rishi Sunak had entered in a declaration of his wife's interest in a kids' company, a childcare company, which hadn't been there before, and there was an investigation starting.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is the declaration, it's ministerial list of interests. Now, it's worth saying this is about transparency, it's about conflict of interest, and he has said that the Prime Minister's wife is a venture capital investor. I mean, it's quite vague. It does say, you know, asterisk, she owns a number of direct shareholdings, including Coro Kids. I don't think this will be the end of it. I mean, she is obviously an incredibly wealthy woman with a lot of investments. You know, is it going to be easier in some ways to just put it all out there rather than these things coming out gradually? You know, it is a bit of a problem. I think the bigger problem is it's taken so long for this to come out generally. It hasn't been published, this list, for almost a year.
That's all we've got time for. Andrew, I would have asked you otherwise. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the BBC iPlayer. Thank you to all of my guests today. Have a nice afternoon.
Rage! Oh my god, fucking listening to this show drives me fucking nuts. Why? Just fucking someone asked me why do I fucking stream this shit, really? I don't do it for likes and clicks, I'm just making sure everybody fucking knows that I just don't. The amount of garbage I have to fucking listen to. First of all, this government shit. They crashed the economy. Banged on about Labour having no money when that's impossible when you've got a central bank. Okay, let's just pretend we live in fucking Westminster bubble land where people literally believe what they're told on the fucking telly. Fucking hell. Anywho. Labour left the economy with no money. No, that was the banks, actually. Because if you remember correctly, what happened? Oh, the banks actually had a Ponzi scheme called a mortgage. You can watch the movie if you want. Anyway, Labour said we're broke, which is the stupidest thing any politician can make. But then again, politicians are fucking stupid anyway. The whole concept of money is weird. Anywho, and they've been using that for 13 years. What was the first thing the Tories did when they got in power? They was the only country in the G7 that said, let's go for austerity. What did every other country do? Spend money. What did the Tories do? Cut every fucking public service. Literally. They did the exact fucking opposite. And you wonder why we're in the state of affairs we're in today. Let's talk about the fucking price of fucking living, as they keep calling it. Crisis of living bullshit. I'm sorry. Was it Russia's fault that we got rid of our gas storage? No, it was the Tories. Point out the fucking obvious. I mean, the literal bullshit in these fucking mad conversations that aren't fact-checked by a student, apparently on the BBC, is fucking miraculous. Can't we fact-check who actually is to blame? I know, the government. Who created the chaos of fucking Brexit? I don't know, the Tories. The fact that these fucking idiots don't actually use common sense when actually having a political debate is fucking mind-blowing. It really fucking is. Whether you agree with Brexit or not, the only reason why it happened is because the Tories were shit scared of UKIP in the fucking local elections. They thought they were going to lose power. So they pandered to the xenophobes in the country. Yes, I'm one of them. I will admit I voted to leave the European Union. But it's got nothing to do with hating Europe. It's got everything to do with being in a fucking trading bloc. Which isn't a trading bloc anymore. I don't know why a trading bloc needs a flag. I just don't. Get the point. Anywho. Let's move on, shall we? The NHS is shit. If you look at the statistics of the NHS has the worst funding since before Labour. Not since before Labour. Since Labour's in power, the NHS was funded at 4.3%, give or take. Or whatever. And now it's at like 2.5. It's fucking low anyway. And you can blame Tony Blair for PFI, which is private fucking bullshit, right? But why did he need the private companies to build new hospitals? Because Thatcher fucking killed the NHS before the Labour Party got in power. I mean, it's like, where are you fucking living? On what planet do you live? It's worse now than it was under Margaret Thatcher in the 80s. It's fucking worse. You can't make this shit up. And these fucking cockwombles on the BBC are trying to tell you stupid shit like, what if a trans person wants to go to fucking hospital? Are you fucking mad? Are you mad? That poor lady on BBC Radio was literally fucking crying her fucking tears because we voted. Wait. Breaking news. Nobody voted for this fucking Truss. Nobody. A bunch of fucking pensioners in the fucking, I don't know, fucking Cotswolds or some fucking random fucking wooded fucking place voted for Liz Truss because they literally don't like the idea of a black person called Rishi Sunak who's literally got more brains and he's a cunt as well. Just pointing up the fucking obvious. Hello? Oh, we don't want the black fella who told us that the white chicks are fucking nutcakes and will crash the economy and cost us 40 billion quid overnight. See that she nearly killed Britain with her bright idea of giving tax cuts to the very people who don't fucking pay tax. You can't make this shit up. It's worse than Monty Python. In fact, Monty Python makes more sense than living in Britain at this current time. I'm surprised we ain't fucking getting in dinghies and fucking going to France. Because this country's fucked and has been ever since the Lib Dems decided they wanted a power grab and get in bed with fucking Poundface. The country's been fucked. Brexit. Everything. Fucking everything. Fucked. Because these fucking cunts are so power hungry. Like football teams. They're fucking annoying. They literally think the country is like a football team. Vote Tory, vote. Fuck them all. Vote independent. Vote for someone who you can actually fucking listen to, who actually makes sense, who lives in your community. Not one of these fucking retards who are parachuted in, who sends you a fucking leaflet. Doesn't even live in your fucking constituency. How the fuck does that even work? I mean, it's just, our political system is so fucking broke. And then you get the SNP. Oh my god, the SNP. We hate the fucking English. We hate Westminster. We want to be separate from the UK. But we also want to suck the EU's fucking dick at the same time. Can't stand the fact that the fucking Britain's left. It's all shit. Okay, fine. Irish is fucking mad. How do you think it's going to work then if you leave the fucking union? It will make Brexit look like a fucking walk in the park. The Constitution of Britain is England and fucking Scotland having babies, right? That's how you get the Constitution in Britain, or the UK. That's how you get the United Kingdom. Scotland and England got married. That's not the same as fucking signing a treaty with the fucking EU to say, I'll buy your cups of tea and I'll buy, fuck knows, chipolatas. Not the same shit. That's a treaty. You can get out of them. Fucking getting married. We all know what marriage is. Divorce. Nah. Not very nice. So fuck you, SNP, you bunch of fucking cunts. I mean, the whole system's broken. And the only reason why it's broken is because we're misinformed as the public. Well, most people are misinformed. I'm not, clearly, as you can tell by my fucking brain. And that's our media. Our media is fucking shit. The BBC, crap. They literally are crap. Someone mentioned it, I think it was Ruck before. The amount of people who work for the BBC, who actually went to school with the very same politicians who you actually vote for, is fucking hilarious. Down south, that is. And you wonder why we get this southern versus northern shit. Because all the people who live down there are telling the rest of us that it's all fine. They're all on fucking stupid amounts of fucking money. Do you think she looks skint? Does she look skint to you? Do you think she has a living fucking crisis going through her mind? No. She gets paid more than a politician, the fucking cunt. That's why she's fucking grinning, the bastard. And who pays for her fucking salary when you come to... Oh, yeah, you stupid fucking cunts do. The BBC, fair and fucking balanced. Fuck off, you sound like Fox News. Because it's the exact same shit. It's not who's presenting the news doesn't matter. It's who the fuck edits the fucking news. Who the people tell her what to fucking say. Go and watch the defamation case about Fox News today on YouTube. They admitted they lie. You know why? They want ratings, they want eyeballs. And that all depends on the ideology of Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch doesn't give a fuck about America. He gives a fuck about getting paid, though. If he can convince you that fucking Donald Trump robbed the fucking, didn't lose the election. He doesn't give a fuck. He gives a fuck about getting paid. Same with the BBC. Oh, we're fair and balanced, blah, blah, blah. Your journalist just got his ass kicked, and it's all over YouTube. Couldn't answer a fucking question from Elon Musk. I mean, at least come prepared, for fuck's sake. You're going to chat shit. Come prepared. Really? You're going to argue with the guy who sends rockets into space for a fucking laugh? The guy changed the entire car industry. Everyone laughed at him when he had his little electric car. Oh, that's fucking stupid. Motherfucker sells more cars than anybody else. And he sends rockets into space with the last of his money that he got from PayPal. The very invention that people take for granted. He started that shit with his mates. Just saying. And he's taking the piss out of them on Twitter. Called the BBC. Well, the government funded, and the BBC started crying about it. He said, fine, I'll change it to public funded. To be fair, it is. But then he took the piss out of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. The corporation said, we're under 70%, so he changed it to 69. What a legend. Now that's funny. Point being is, though, the media brainwashes people, and don't listen to waffle on YouTube either. You're going to listen to people like me. Test my ability then. If you disagree with me, go fucking research it yourself. The government's full of shit. And that cunt before just talked about fucking energy. We've been paying the oil companies billions and billions every fucking year with taxpayers' money. This is the maddest part. That cunt just said, well, if we tax them, they won't invest in renewables and shit. These mothers fucking knew about global warming in the fucking 70s, you fucking cunts. Go and check. ExxonMobil, their own scientists said putting oil in the air is a bad idea. It's going to fuck with the fucking atmosphere. No, don't tell us that. We need to still sell oil. It's literally ExxonMobil's own scientists. It's so fucking new, but the cunts never tell you this shit. Fuck them all. I mean, I don't agree with interrupting me snooker, though. Don't do that, because that's fucking retarded. Just saying. Anyway, fuck them all. And fuck the Tories mostly. People say, well, Keir Starmer's not a good leader. No, that's a right-wing fucking talking point as well. I'm sick of fucking people like Nevada Media shitting on fucking the left. Which technically isn't even the left, it's the centre ground. If you know anything about a Venn diagram anymore, you know what a Venn diagram even is. There's no left anymore. Everyone's in the middle. It's just the fringes that somehow, I blame the fucking internet, get a bigger voice. The fringes get the big voices. Like Donald Trump, he's fringe, but somehow the media bigs them up to be like the centre ground when they're not. And don't tell me half of Americans voted for these fuckers. Most Americans don't vote. You can't have half of 47% of the fucking electorate, you stupid fucking cunts. Most Americans don't vote. Most people in the United Kingdom don't vote. How's that half the electorate? If half of them, more of them, don't be asked to even vote in the fucking first place. You know what that's called? Play on words. Well, half the electorate said they're going to... No, they fucking didn't. You can look up any statistic, literally any, and say how many people vote versus don't vote. What's the shock? Most people don't vote. So that's not half the electorate then, is it? If half of them, more of them, don't fucking vote. Fucking clowns. I fucking hate democracy. Why? Because it's fucking run by kleptomaniacs with newspapers. And then the other fucking poor bastards, the fucking stupid cunts on Monty Python, believe the shit that the fucking media tells them. Like this twat in blue. Fucking annoying, honestly. But get out the Tories because they're shit anyway. Oh, we give you 20,000 cops, we got more cops. You cut the cops, you fucking idiots. Now you want an applaud. Yeah, you want me to clap because you give me more cops, which is the same level of cops that we had in 1997, which is 20 odd fucking years ago. You bunch of useless cunts. Why has crime gone down? I don't know. Because there's no one to report it to because we got no fucking cops. Use common sense, you bunch of fucking cunts. Fuck my fucking life, I'm going to shop. Gonna have a nice fucking walk to the shop. Fucking hell. I hate this country. It's fucking brainwashed the fuck. 70% of the UK media is owned by fucking the right wing. And 2 of them don't even pay